Hello everyone. In this section today we will be talking about interpersonal communication. These are the notes for that class in the PowerPoint, which you also have access to. So we're talking about interpersonal communication. We're talking about a process by which two people, known as a dyad, exchange meaning by simultaneously sending and receiving symbolic messages. And again, we go back to that word process that we've been using throughout the semester in talking about what communication is. That process is something that is ongoing and continual, really has no beginning and no end. We talk about different types of relationships. I just want to point out two things about relationships, two basic types of relationships. One is complementary relationships, and the other is symmetrical relationships. What we mean by complementary relationships, we mean relationships in which one partner in the relationship has certain qualities, characteristics, skills that the other person in the meeting or in the partnership may be lacking. So, for example, in a intimate relationship like a marriage, one partner may be very outgoing and very extroverted, while the other partner may be very introverted. And so they share those things, so one complements the other, one builds the other up. Symmetrical relationships, on the other hand, are those relationships in which both partners have very similar characteristics, skills, abilities. And again, this oftentimes happens in relationships. The speculation is like if identical twins really are symmetrical in what they bring to a relationship, but even then, I think that identical twins would have different characteristics, one that is different from the other. Complementary relationships really speaks back to that adage that the opposites attract, and so a lot of times in relationships that will be quite evident. We talk about relationship behaviors. We may also talk about relationship behaviors such as converging behavior and diverging behavior. Converging behavior is behavior in which one partner in a relationship will adjust their behavior to match that of the other partner. So, for example, you may notice in a parent-child relationship, if the parent starts whispering to the small child will whisper back. That's what we mean by converging behavior. Diverging behavior is when we separate our behavior from that of another person. So, for example, if you have a friend that is obnoxious and being embarrassing to you, your behavior may distance from that other person as well. So those are kind of behaviors that we talk about when we talk about interpersonal communication itself. So who do we form, or why do we form relationships, and why do we need relationships? Well, the first need is a need of inclusion. We want to be included. We want to be part of something outside of ourselves. Second is a need for control. And this one can be a little bit misleading in that we think of control in a negative effect, that somebody's trying to control you. But we also have this need for control in ordering our environment, ordering the world in which we live. And so relationships give us sometimes that skill. So, for example, parent-child relationship, there is that need for, perhaps on the parent side, to make sure that everything is safe and in order with the child. The third need is need for affection. Our need to be loved, to be liked, to be accepted by someone else really speaks to that need for affection. We form relationships with those that we share proximity, meaning closeness as far as distance or as far as location is concerned. Even though I think internet has changed some of that, the web has allowed us to form relationships with people who are further away. Relationships with similarity, people that we share a certain background, maybe culture, maybe dealing with age, gender, not gender necessarily, but those kinds of things. Attractiveness, people that we are attracted to. Complementary, again, comes back into play. And we also form relationships with people that can reward us. We can derive some benefit from the relationship in that person. There are development and dissolving of relationships. NAP, K-N-A-P-P, and Vangelisti, V-A-N-G-E-L-I-S-T-I, really are the ones who have put together the stages of coming together stages and coming apart stages of relationships. The first part is the coming together stage, and again, we go through certain development in relationships. There's the initiating stage. That's the stage in which we may see somebody and we smile at them, may strike up a conversation with them, and we begin with the very minute details of relationship forming, getting acquainted kind of stage here. The second is experimenting stage. This is where we begin to look at the relationship and to see if there's more things that we may want in this relationship from this other person. So that's the experimenting stage. This would be the stage in romantic relationships where we begin to date. We begin to go out with the other person, spend more time with them, and get to know them a little bit better to see if this is somebody we want to form a long, lasting relationship with. Then there is the integrating relationship part of the relationship. This is when you begin to become a couple, and you begin to share more and self-disclose more to the other person about yourself. The fifth stage is the bonding stage. This is the stage at which the pronouns I and you become replaced with that pronoun we. So this is where the stage where especially in romantic relationsps, when we begin to see and identify ourselves as a couple. Not only do we identify ourselves as a couple, but our friends, our relatives may also see us as a couple and hold that identity before us. So that's the coming together stages, and when you reach that part of it, then you reach a period of maintaining relationships. Some view this as the plateau, the high point of relationship forming, and I think that's probably a good analogy to think about as far as relationships. This is the daily part of living together in a relationship. Married couples or long-term relationships, friendships, work relationships even, you have this kind of maintaining role that we reach in a certain part of our relationship. Then on the other side of the curve is the coming apart phases. There's the differentiating phase where we begin to no longer identify necessarily as we, but begin to show a little bit more independence in relationship. And then there's circumscribing. That's where we begin to spend less time and less contact with each other. Stagnating phase, where the we becomes you and I. And that's really the avoiding stage, and then of course there's the terminating stage. The thing about this is that not all relationships necessarily go through all of these stages at a time. I think the biggest part of our relationship is in the maintaining phase. Some of our relationships may never make it to that, and some of them may make it to the maintenance phase. And I think sometimes our relationships, we go back and forth on that maintenance stage. Sometimes we move over to differentiating or circumscribing or even stagnating in relationships, and then something may happen that brings us back to the other side. It begins that reforming again. I think we go back and forth on that. As far as terminating, just think in terms of a couple that have been married for 50 or 60 years and one of the partners dies in the relationship. Well, you go from the maintenance stage automatically to the terminating stage because the relationship is over. All right. Moving on here, I want to talk a little bit about relational dialectics, and you'll have an assignment on relational dialectics. Relational dialectics believes relationships are influenced by opposing forces or tensions that change throughout the lifespan of a relationship and are managed by communication between relationship partners. And there are three basic tensions. The first tension is autonomy versus connectedness, predictability versus change, openness versus closeness. Autonomy and connectedness deals with the amount of time that a couple spends together. So, for example, in relationships that are very new, especially intimate relationships, the couple will spend a lot of time together. And there is a point when in relationships where you still really love each other and care for each other, but you want a little bit of separation. So it's the struggle between autonomy, selfness, and being connected. That's where the tension arises. So that's the first one, deals with time. The second is predictability versus change, and this deals with routine in relationships. The story I like to tell is the story about my dad. After my mom died, my dad remarried somebody that he'd known for a long time, and this was my dad's routine. He got up at the same time every morning. He put his coffee on, got the newspaper, began to read the newspaper. Then he got dressed, had his cereal. Then about noon, he and his wife would drive over to Arby's. And my dad would order the Arby's roast beef and cheese sandwich, French curly Q fries, and strawberry shake. And then if they had any errands to run, had to go to the store or doctor's appointments, they would do that. Then they would drive home, and about 5 o'clock in the evening, they would get in the car, they would drive over to the steakhouse, and my dad would order a ribeye steak, cooked medium rare, baked potato, and salad. And this was his routine 7 days a week, every day of the month. It didn't change. It didn't vary at all. And after my dad died and I went home to take care of some family matters, his wife, I offered to take his wife out for, his widow out for lunch. And her words to me is, you could take me out for lunch, but don't dare take me to Arby's. Again, his was very routine, very predictable. You could set your watch and you knew where he was going to be at a certain time, but she wanted change. And so that oftentimes happens, that tension between the two. And the third is the tension between openness and closeness. Openness deals with self-disclosure. How much information are we going to tell our relational partner about ourselves? Some relational partners want to know everything about their partner. They want to know everything about what's going on. And some partners are very reserved and very closed-mouthed in what they share with their relational partner. So this is the third tension in relational dialectics. You will have an assignment over this coming up. So we get to self-disclosure, or as I put it here, do I really have to meet your parents? Self-disclosure is how much do we tell the other person about ourselves, how much do we disclose about ourselves. And the longer the relationships last, the more we are likely to open up to the other person about who we are and tell them things that we otherwise may keep to ourselves. Self-disclosure is the process of revealing things about yourself to people that people are unlikely to know. It involves an investment of time, a commitment, an investment of trust, as well as comfort. Do we feel comfortable in what we reveal to the relational partner? All right. So moving on in our presentation, I want to talk about how we communicate with other people, communicating with others, and how we express ourselves. And I want to talk about three basic ways of communication in this section. The first is entitled verbal aggressiveness, the second is entitled verbal assertiveness, and the third is titled argumentativeness.